Today is Shushan Purim Katan. After the shir yesterday, I mentioned to Rabbi that I wanted to talk about Purim Katan. Yesterday I forgot. He said, if tomorrow Shushan Purim Katan. So, of course, today is the 15th of the first month of Adar. So, technically speaking, today commemorates the day of Shushan's miracle. It just happens to be that we're celebrating next month because we're deferring it. The truth is actually that the first Purim should be the primary one, even for with respect. The first Adar should be the primary one, even with respect to the celebration of Purim. And the primary reason it's not is because we want to bring the two celebrations of Purim and Pesach close together. So in some respect, the celebration is now. There's actually a discussion amongst the commentaries who analyze the words of the Rambam versus the words of the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch. And from some footnotes I saw in the Rebbe's talk on Purim Katan, it would seem that the Rebbe is learning that in the Rambam, whatever joy is associated with the first month of Adar, the first month of Adar, the Purim of the first month of Adar, 14th, 15th, yesterday and today, is an independent joy, because it in itself is a minor holiday in its own right. Whereas it would seem from the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch that the celebration, or whatever joy that exists on the 14th, 15th, the first of Adar, is only because it didn't get the second of Adar. As if to say, is it independent or is it an extension of the original Purim? It seems like there's a dispute between it would emerge a little differently based on the Rambam's reading versus the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch's reading. Meaning, does it get its own independence or is it a continuation? But either way, the point is that today there is something to be said. And furthermore, the Ramah is Rabbi Moshe Isserlis, who wrote the Ashkenazi glosses on the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch is written, authored by Rabbi Yosef Karo, a Sephardi, and Rabbi Moshe Isserlis, who lived around the same time, instead of writing another work of halacha for Ashkenazim, just took the Sephardic one and added glosses so that you know where the Ashkenazi diverts from the Sephardi tradition. So every Shulchan Aruch, every standard edition of the Shulchan Aruch would have the text of the actual author, and then glosses wherever Ashkenazi divergent. Those glosses are written by the Ramah. Ramah Reish Mem Aleph stands for Rabbi Moshe Isserlis. So in his final gloss, which is on Purim Katan, right? The final gloss of Orach Chaim, part one of the Shulchan Aruch, is called Orach Chaim, which goes through a Jew's routine, starting with daily, then weekly Shabbos, then monthly Rosh Chodesh, and then yearly, starting from Pesach, your annual routine, starting from Pesach, ending with Purim. So after he discusses the laws of Purim, he puts the laws of Purim Katan. Even though Purim Katan is technically before Purim, because it's the first Adar rather than the second, but because it's less often, it's put after. So the very last gloss from the Ramah is on the very last law of Purim Katan. And the law there is discussing whether or not you're allowed to fast on Purim Katan, if someone elected to do so, for whatever reason. Let's say someone's getting married tonight. It's a custom to fast on the day of the wedding. Or maybe someone had a bad dream and wants to fast for it. So that's the primary discussion. And then it goes into a discussion about whether or not there's a requirement to have an extra meal, a feast meal. And the reason is because the Mishnah says in Megillah, Ein bein Adar Rishon Adar Sheni, there's no distinction between the first Adar and the second Adar, other than Kriyas Megillah, the reading of the Megillah. Which might imply, if the only distinction between the first Adar and the second Adar is that you don't read the Megillah on the first Adar, then everything else, maybe you should do. Indeed, the Taz brings that there were those who would host a full-on Purim Suda in the first Adar.
What about the other mitzvahs, gifts to the poor, and all that?
So those are extensions, to some degree, extensions of the meal. Anyway, there are others who learn the Mishnah differently. The others learn the Mishnah differently, that if you thought you were going to be celebrating on Purim, and then it gets diverted, then you only do the Megillah again the second time. Something like that. Some interesting reading. They have a different reading of the Mishnah. I can't remember exactly what it is. The Taz mentions it also. At any rate, what I wanted to bring up was that the Ramah concludes with the back and forth. There are those that do make a meal. It's not our custom, but nonetheless you still should increase somewhat. He concludes by saying you should increase somewhat in your meal on the 14th of Adar, on Purim Katan, in order to fulfill your obligation of those who are more stringent. Right? There are those that are stringent and say that you have to have a meal, a celebrating meal on the minor Purim, and you should increase your meal to fulfill the obligation of those that are stringent. This is what the Ramah concludes. And then he adds a verse. after this, after he makes this halachic ruling, that even though it's his view that you should primarily have a meal on the first Adar, on the 14th of the first Adar, but the custom is not to do so. But nonetheless, you should increase in order to to cover your bases of those that are more stringent and say you have to have a meal. This is his halachic ruling. He adds a verse. He adds a quote from a verse, which is in Mishlei, which says, "Toiv leiv mishta tamid." Happy heart, or someone who's of a good heart, good-natured, is continually feasting. If you're a good-natured person, you're a happy person, you're always feasting. So one way of reading it is, and this is a common way, so it emerges from Magen Avraham and from others, that he's not talking about a halacha. He's just ending his work, or ending Orach Chaim with a kind of poetic verse that talks about happiness, and it has the word tamid continually, because he opened up his work with the word tamid. He opened up the Orach Chaim with saying, place God before me tamid continuously, Shiviyas Hashem lenegdi tamid. So he's opening up with the tamid at the beginning of keeping God before me continually. He's ending with this tamid continually, the continuous joy, and it's a kind of poetic way of closing and opening the routine of the Jew. That's what Orach Chaim is, the routine of the Jew, opening with the presence of Hashem before me always, and closing with joy. But don't take it as a halachic reading. That's how many people understand that line. And the Rabbi has a whole discussion on that very idea of opening and closing with the two tamids. And I talked about it yesterday, and there's a video of that if you want to see that. But to add for today, since it's Shushan Purim Katan, is that there are those who read this verse as a halacha. That when the Ramah quotes this verse, that a happy heart's continually feasting, it's a halacha. Meaning to say, whenever there's a doubt between two opinions whether or not you're supposed to feast on that day to celebrate, you should go with the more stringent view, which says you have to feast. Why should you go with the more stringent view? Because there's a verse which says that a happy heart is always feasting. So if you ever have the opportunity to feast because there's an astringent opinion which says to feast, then do so. Right? And therefore, I just finished telling you that there are those that say that you're supposed to feast on Purim Katan, the minor Purim, and I'm telling you to increase in order to fulfill your obligation of those that are more stringent. I'm also telling you a verse which backs up the idea that whenever there's a possibility to be more stringent and have a feast, you should do so, because that's what happy people do. So those that read this line as an actual halach. And the Rebbe says like this. I saw the Rebbe, I wanted to find it now to look it up again, but if I remember correctly, the Rebbe says like this. If that's the case, then it also applies to Shushan Purim Katan. Because there are those that have the discussion as to whether or not, generally speaking, on Shushan Purim, meaning on the primary Purim, and you're not in Jerusalem, you're not in a walled city, but it's Shushan Purim. So there's those that say that you should have an increased meal then too, in camaraderie with other Jews that are celebrating. Now if that's the case, then, and you're going with the Mishnah which says that there's no distinction between the first Adar and the second Adar other than the reading of the Megillah, then the first Adar on your Shushan Purim Katan, on your minor Shushan Purim, which is today the 15th, the first month of Adar, you should also have a kind of meal. At least there's some sort of view to say so. Now, if the Ramah is quoting a verse to tell you that whenever you have an option to increase in the meal because a happy heart always has a meal, then even on the minor Shushan Purim today, because there is the option of those who say that you should have a meal to increase in joy, Toiv Lev Mishta Tamid, a good heart always takes the opportunity to have a good Verbrengen. Okay. So even today, Shushan Purim Katan, in this last words of the Ramah, which quotes this verse that a happy heart is always feasting, one could interpret this to mean as a halacha, that even today on Shushan Purim Katan, the minor Shushan Purim, so it's not even your primary Purim. It's nobody's primary Purim. It's not even Yerushalayim's primary Purim. It's a secondary Purim of other Jews, but because there is the option to increase in your meal, and a happy heart is always feasting, like the verse says that the Ramah quotes, even today, it's an opportune time to increase in joy, and to spread that joy throughout the whole year. So that's a little bit something about Shushan Purim Katan to make up for yesterday not talking about Purim Katan.
Okay.
Yeah.
So does that mean that we have to make also a feast on Shushan Purim? I mean, not Shushan Purim, on the 15th of Adar 2nd?
Yes. That there are straight up opinions which talk about making a feast then. Here I'm adding that even the 15th of the first month, to be more stringent, at least increase something because of this verse, Toiv Lev Mishta Tamid. Again, that's if you're taking the reading that he means halacha. There are those that read it that he means just a homily, like a poetic thing. But either way, the verse still stands. A good, happy heart is always feasting. You know, this idea of always being in a good mood and verbrengen. Yeah. The Ramah talks about how when the Magen Avram says that when the Ramah quotes this verse that a happy heart is always feasting, it's talking about Simcha Shel Mitzvah Selekenu, serving Hashem with joy. And I talked about that yesterday. I gave a class and I talked a little bit about the Magen Avram's interpretation of this verse, that it's talking about, just generally speaking, not specific to Purim Katan, and what that joy means, and you can check it out. It's online. All right, now to the Gemara. We are Lamed Aleph Amud Beis 31b, top of the page, second line, Amar Rab Zeida. And now we finally get back to its perfect time you come today, because we had very long brackets while you were gone. Today we get back to the laws of Megillah. I'm saying Megillah because I'm thinking Purim. Because the laws of Torah, Tefillin, and Mezuzah. Megillah we're much more lenient on because it's not as we're much more lenient on Megillah because it's not biblical like the other things. All right. So first it talks about Sefer Torah, and then it goes into Mezuzah, as we'll see.
I wanted to ask, what year was Purim?
I don't know the exact year, but I can give you a general. I'm sure there is an exact year. Maybe Rabbi Gimple knows, but I'll tell you the general ballpark so you know where we are. It's between the destruction of the first and second temple. So, if the destruction of the temple was the destruction of, work backwards, I'm very bad with dates, but I'll just give you a general gist. The destruction of the second temple was roughly 2,000 years ago.
Okay.
Right, roughly. The second temple stood for 420 years. And then the second temple stood for 420 years. And Purim happened before the building of the second temple. So you're talking roughly 1,500 years ago, a little less. But I don't know the exact date. I'm sure there is an exact date, I just don't have it. Sorry? I'm sorry, 2,500 years ago, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, roughly. The King Achashverosh marries a Jewish...
100 years after we received the Torah.
Longer. Because there was about...
we received the Torah approximately 3,300 years ago? Approximately?
Yes, it's maybe about 900,000 years after. Something like that.
900 years to 1,000 years after.
It's less than 2,000 years ago that the temple was destroyed. It's roughly around there.
It's around 3,400.
Yeah. I'm very bad with dates, but I'll take you.
The first temple was destroyed in 3,338.
The first temple was destroyed in
3,338.
38 of the Jewish calendar.
I'm talking Jewish calendar only.
Okay.
So
and approximately 60-something years later.
It's about 34. It's 34 or
34 something. Yeah, I'll take your word for it. I'm very bad at dates.
It's pretty close to that.
Yeah. But just to understand, just to give you context, Achashverosh marries a Jewish girl, Esther, right? They have a child named Daryavish, or Darius II.
Darius II.
Right? He grows up, and he's the one that gives permission for the Jews to rebuild the temple. So he's a Jewish king, technically. His mother's Jewish, he's Jewish. Right? He's the one that gives permission to do... There's all kinds of backstory. I think Jacob Tink took the book. But there's a book there in this set, the Torah Anthology. Generally speaking, you want to understand Jewish history through the lens of Scripture. Torah Anthology is your set. The Torah Anthology right here, this white set right there.
Yeah.
That's Torah Anthology. The Mamlo is, in English it's the Torah Anthology.
Oh, okay.
Brilliantly translated by Rabbi Kaplan, one of the greatest writers of the last, greatest translators of the last century. Sorry?
So I know what I'm going to
Yeah, so he goes through, the Mamlo is exactly its origins and how it came to be is a good question. But at any rate, it's like a conglomerate of midrash, history, some even halacha, collated in a very reader-friendly manner, intended clearly to be written for the masses, not necessarily for the scholar, and because it was originally written in Arabic, if I'm not mistaken, originally written in Arabic, and then later translated to Hebrew, and then translated to English. And if I'm not mistaken, Kaplan himself knew Arabic and wrote that to English, from Arabic to English. Is that correct?
Wasn't it Ladino?
Maybe it's Ladino. Ladino. So Ladino is like a mix of Arabic and Spanish, like the Yiddish version of, it's a Sephardic version of Yiddish.
That's right, exactly.
Maybe it's Ladino, correct. Maybe it's Ladino, not Arabic. Anyway, it was written in a common tongue is the point I'm making, because it was written meant for a thing. So there's one book on the Book of Esther. And that's where, if you want to get the full story, that's what you should check out. But I think Jacob Tink took it because he asked me the same question. So I can ask him where it is. So I'm going to make you in charge of making sure he brings it back to the library. Otherwise, we'll miss it.
No, we take away his library card.
Yeah.
His phone number?
Yeah.
You have it?
Yeah.
That will be helpful.
Okay. So now we're back to the laws of Sefer Torah, Tefillin, Mezuzah, and we start with Sefer Torah. Amar Rabbi Zeira. Rabbi Zeira says, Amar Rav Chananel, in the name of Chananel, Amar Rav, in the name of Rav. Kera, or Kara, a rip, a tear, Haba b'shnei shittin, which extends 2 lines. So Torahs have lines, of course, and this is a tear that extends through 2 lines. It should be noted that this is only if the words themselves are not ripped. So this line, this rip, this tear, which extends 2 lines, very, very conveniently goes between words. Somehow. So it's just an issue of aesthetics, not an issue of the word.
Or between columns, for example.
We'll get to that in a second, actually. Between columns, the Gemara is going to get to. But here it's between words. So says the Gemara, Yitvar, you can stitch up that tear and keep on reading from the Torah. Because the tear is very small, the rip is very small. It's not so bad in terms of its aesthetics. Stitch it up and keep on reading. Keep on using it.
But that, if the stitch doesn't touch the letters, right?
Yeah, it doesn't touch the letters, yeah.
Stitch it up on the,
Yeah.
on the
I'm trying to remember where I was reading that. If it's on the actual line, then you can't... I was reading it in Steinsaltz's halachic commentary on the side. Yeah. Yeah, sorry, if a stitch is touched, same thing with the stitches, it shouldn't touch the letters, it's correct.
Repair is always by stitching. It's not by any other method.
Stitching, yeah.
Like with a needle and a thread.
And a thread, and the thread's made from kosher animal too. All of the Torah is made from a kosher animal. All of it. So you couldn't use like glue or something like that. Yeah, it has to be stitched.
Not even like a glue from let's say plant-based or something like that. It's always...
I don't think so. We'll see in a minute that they used to use a gloss, and they still use a gloss over the parchment to keep it strong.
Glue, which is from
But I don't think so.
What?
I don't know. I shouldn't answer because I don't know.
They
From
put
an
gloss over tefillin too, right?
On the actual parchment, you'll see in a minute. We'll talk about different glosses that we use, which came from plants. The gloss comes from plants, so it would seem at least. But
We're not eating it. We're just gluing.
it's not over the parchment. It's not over the gloss is not over the letters. It's on the actual parchment to keep it stronger. I'll show you in a second. You'll feel it.
Oh, okay.
But
Even today,
we're talking
where
about.
you
Oh, sorry. I don't think we use glue. I'm pretty sure it's only stitching.
even today where you can use like Scotch tape or something, they won't do that. They'll always use a stitch.
The truth is, I've seen Torahs
It's more
where they have a
like
patch,
A patch.
a patch of parchment, like a hole, and there's a patch of parchment. I've seen such a thing,
Yeah, I saw that too.
and it's not
Yeah,
stitched.
Yeah, yeah.
So I don't know. I shouldn't answer because I don't know.
Yeah. But maybe
I
the
shouldn't
patch-
answer that,
maybe
I don't
the
know.
patch is stitched.
This patch is not stitched because otherwise it would come through into the letters. Like I've seen patches on a Torah, right?
Uh-huh.
And I haven't seen it.
Unless the patch
Stitched.
edges are around the
No, like
inside between margins. And
no. I've seen a patch right in the middle of words, and it's clear. It seems to you that it's glued. So maybe you are right. I shouldn't answer the question. I don't know. But here it talks about stitching. So it's a good question. I don't know the answer. I don't know.
Could that patch have been there from the beginning when they made the parchment? That
Nah.
they put no.
A Torah like that is gonna buy a Torah that has a patch before you even started.
Right. Okay.
because you don't.
Yeah. So that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. But here the more talks about stitching. So I don't know.
Yeah, because for sure that was the only way to do it then.
Yeah. So maybe today would be different. Yeah. Good point. I don't know. I shouldn't answer. Have a good day. So the Gemara continues. B'shalish, if the tear extends 3 lines, then al yitvar, it should not be stitched. Rather, you remove, as Rashi says it, you remove the entire sheet. Right? We explained how the Torah is not one long scroll; it's made up of sheets, and the sheets are stitched together. So this tear extends more than 3 lines. It's too long. It's not good if you stitched it back up. So remove the entire sheet, and it gets interned. It gets buried.
If it goes into words.
No, even if it doesn't go into words, just by the very fact that the tear extends 3 lines.
Oh, 3 lines.
Yeah, 2 lines is the threshold for what we consider aesthetically acceptable for a tear that's stitched up.
So if there's a tear from one end of a line to the other end of a line, it's all right.
We'll get to that in a minute.
By the way, in English we say tear. Tear means it comes from our eyes.
As
You're
opposed
not
to
tearing a paper. A tear, you say tear in English.
tear as opposed to?
Tear.
Tear. Oh, tear is a.
Tear is what comes from the eye.
I didn't realize that there was a different pronunciation for tear and for tear.
Yeah, that's why I mentioned it.
My apologies.
No,
But yes, I don't mean tears that drop onto the Torah. I mean an actual rip. Okay.
If you rip the Torah, you'll
So you
have
tear
tears.
the-
Maybe ripping the Torah causes you to tear up because the Torah has been
The
ripped.
famous phrase was the tearing of the crown from the king, because of he didn't listen to Hashem, which was supposed to
All right.
Amalek.
All right. Okay, let's continue a few more lines. Amalei Rabbi Zutra le Rav Ashi. Rabbi Zuti said to Rav Ashi, Hachi Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah Medafti. Rabbi Yirmiyah from the place called Dafti said the following: Mishmei Rav, in the name of Rava. In qualifying the statement we just made before, the statement we made before was that the threshold is a tier of 2 lines, and a tier that extends 2 lines can be repaired. A tier of 3 lines cannot be repaired. So in qualifying that, Rava said, and we had the tradition through Rabbi Yirmiyah, through Rav Ashi, through Rabbi Zutri. Through Rabbi Yirmiyah, through Rabbi Zutri. He said as follows: Ha damrin, that which we have just been taught, b'shalish al yitvar, that if the tear extends the length of 3 lines, it cannot be stitched. Rather, it has to be interned. Loy amron is not said ella, only in a case batikta, where the Torah is old. So if the scroll, the very parchment, is old and worn out, that is when I tell you you can't stitch it. You can't stitch up a Torah that's been ripped with the length of 3 lines. Because if it's old and it's stitched up again, it makes it even more frail, because it's weak to begin with. Avachadata. But if it's a new Torah and the parchment is strong, less lumba, it's no big deal if you stitch up a line, even if it's more than 2, even if that tear is more than the length of 3 lines. And moreover, and when I say an old Torah, I don't mean literally old in age. And when I say new, I don't mean new in age. So what's the difference? What's the defining factor between new and old? Ella, rather,
Brittle.
The distinction is whether or not the parchment has been treated with a certain solution. That's what I was talking about, the gloss. So if you take today's parchments are basically all treated with a solution. After they stretch out, parchment is made of cowhide, and there's a whole process of stretching it out and scraping off all of everything else other than the actual leather, other than the actual skin. And before they write on it, they dip it into like this, into a gloss, into solution. And it's made of some sap from a tree, if I'm not mistaken.
Gallnut.
Sorry?
Called gallnut.
Called gallnut? There you go. It's a sap from a tree, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, and they dip it into this thing. So if you touch it, you'll feel the distinction between. You'll feel there's a certain softness to the actual paper. You can have a feel. You'll see it.
Also, the color is different. Darker.
Yeah, you feel it. You feel there's a little softness to the paper, and it gives it a certain strength. So if it has that, then even if it's technically old, then you may stitch it even if the rip is more than 3 lines, because it's strong enough to withhold the stitching. It doesn't ruin it because it's been treated with a solution. So a brand new one that hasn't been treated with a solution may not be stitched if the tear, I can't pronounce this right, if the tear is the extension of 3 lines. But if it's old, even if it's old, but if it has that solution, so it can withstand a stitching even that it extends 3 lines, then you may do so. And that's the distinction, that's the main marker.
So feet sounds like old then. Havi shaf or katika, like an old one.
Is that
Sorry?
The feet sound is a havi shaf or like an old one then.
Sorry? No.
Havi shaf or katika.
Yeah, it's the reverse. So again, afitzin avishachar katika. If it's treated, then it's considered like it's old.
Yeah.
Why?
Because see, probably
I thought it would make it stronger.
I know the whole question also, but in general we do also for Torah.
Because all of our Torahs today are considered like
Rabbi Tam raises that question. What does it mean?
So this is not Rashi's interpretation?
They're different than Rashi, because Rashi seems to understand if
Seems to be the reverse.
Makes it dark, makes it like old. It probably is more like striped. Well, white seems it's clear, and they put this stitching not so bad.
Right. Hold on one second. Let me have a look at the.
It was white.
Let me look at this one second.
Yeah.
Let's have a look at our trusty Stern's out here, because I'm pretty sure that's where I picked it up from. $31B. No, you're right. I got it wrong. So the ones that are the one he writes here, the ones that are processed with gal are labeled as new. So he's different than Rashi.
Yeah, maybe
He's different than Rashi. So he probably must have got it from somewhere else. And the logic is, as I said, once it's treated, it becomes stronger, and therefore, even if it's old, because it's been treated, we treat it as new, and it can withstand the stitching. I don't understand where Rashi's coming from.
Yeah, what other purpose would it be to dip it if it weren't to make it something
Some
better?
stronger.
Well, it's not so quite strong. It's a question here of the color.
Color?
Yeah,
So Rashi's saying it's a question of color. If it's treated, it's darker, then your stitching ruins it. So Rashi is a different understanding. Yeah. Okay. So we have two different readings of this. If it's treated, does treating it make it withstand the sewing and therefore it can keep on going? Or does treating it make its color darker and therefore you should not stitch it, making it worse? So it's a different interpretation.
Yeah, I see the Gilad Shas has different gears than Rashi. Give you the order.
So there you go. So there you go. This is where you got it from. Okay, so let's conclude this discussion with one more line, because this is we'll just close this discussion, and tomorrow we'll get into more. Because someone mentioned about in between lines horizontally and in the margins between the columns. So we'll get that tomorrow, God willing. But let's just conclude this, and that is the Hani Miligit Begidin. And all of this is said if you're stitching it together using sinews from an animal. And then you have these limitations. Then you're allowed to stitch. But if you're using ordinary thread, loy, then you cannot stitch it at all. And I suppose the reason is because the stitching from the animals are much stronger. Rather than they use sinews. They use sinews from a cow to stitch it. Your tefillin, if you notice in your tefillin, the shalreish is little like things popping up. That's sinews from an animal that stitch your tefillin together. That's what it is. It's very, very strong. It's very thin and very strong. You pull it and it doesn't rip.
Sinews are they vessels, or is it?
They're like tiny little veins. They're very tiny veins. Kind of, not exactly veins, but they're kind of like that.
Well, it is like a leather though.
The sinew.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. It's very strong. So if you're using that to stitch it together, then you can do so. If you're using regular thread, says the Gemara, don't stitch it, because that's just going to ruin your Torah even more so.
One hole.
But also, it's not kosher. It's not from a kosher animal.
Yeah, so we're talking about that before, because Michael raised this good point that we see sometimes glue on a Torah. So I'm not sure of the limitations. So that's why I said I'm not. I thought I had it, but I'm going to pull back from making any rulings on glue, which materials you're allowed to use and not allowed to use, because clearly we see Torahs that have patches that are glued, and I'm not really sure what the halacha is around that. Perhaps we'll get to it later, so I want to leave that for now. But for here, the Gemara, so let's just recap what the Gemara is saying here. If we go all the way back, when are you allowed to stitch? You're allowed to stitch if you're using sinews, and if it's a Torah that's been treated with solution, at least in this version that we've been studying, then no matter how big the Torah is, you're allowed to. If you're using sinews, and the Torah has not been treated with a solution, but the parchment has been treated with a solution, then your limit is only a stitching that's the extension of 2 lines. But if you're not using sinew, you're using thread, don't stitch. It's not going to work for you.
So the solution is not a modern thing. The solution's
way back, yeah. They had. It seems like they mixed. He probably described it in more detail, but it seems like they mixed some sort of sap. There's gal with water, and then you just dip it in and let it dry or something like that.
Also puts kind of salt and even flour.
Salt
and to harden the parchment.
Yeah, there's a whole process. It's very fascinating. Maybe my brother-in-law is a sofer. Perhaps one day we'll have him come in here and give us a whole demonstration and all this stuff.
Hello.
When he's come to visit anyway. All right, have a wonderful day and a happy Shushan Purim.
Sure.